most of y'all, I guess. But for those on Zoom, I'm Kayla with Advance Title. Zach and Taylor asked me to come in just to kind of go over the ALTA settlement statement. I also brought, because I think it's important, a CD and a seller CD. I think that's where some of the confusion comes in as an agent as to kind of what you need and what your clients get versus what you're going to have. So I thought we kind of needed to talk about that in a package deal. I'm actually going to go to the CD first. So if you want to move through to right there. Perfect. Okay. So I know a lot of y'all hear the term closing disclosure, but what that really means sometimes is confusing in the land of ALTAs versus disclosures versus HUDs. So what you're looking at is a closing disclosure. This is the document that the lender is going to issue to the buyer. This is the document that starts that 3-day clock. So if your closing is on a Friday, your client needs to have this in hand by Monday or Tuesday to acknowledge those numbers. The closing disclosure came along when TRID was implemented, which was supposed to be a way to make it easier for buyers to have the information in hand ahead of time prior to closing, to alleviate them getting to the closing table and then having a loan amount that they didn't expect, or a loan type, or an interest rate. It stops the bait and switch that we kind of saw back in 2008-9 that caused a lot of problems. This closing disclosure is only issued to your buyer. As title companies, we are not allowed to send this out to anyone but the buyer. The seller does not see it. You as the agent should not be seeing these. If your title companies are sending you closing disclosures, they should not be. This is strictly for the buyer, and TRID says that it can only be released to the buyer and back to the lender. Because if you look at this first page, this kind of has personal information on the loan, the interest rate. Y'all can see that this closed a month ago, so that rate is no more. But it breaks down their principal and interest. It breaks down any mortgage insurance, their escrow amounts, and their payment schedules. And TRID feels like that's information that agents don't need, and that sellers don't need, and cooperating title agencies don't need. So this document down at the bottom shows your cash to close. Page 2 looks very similar to the old school HUD, for those of you that are familiar with the HUD. And this is where these are all of the loan fees. So that's going to be everything that the lender is charging them for the loan, including their title fees, their recording fees. Scrolling on down, that's got everything on it. Some lenders will go ahead and fill in the seller's information on this far side right here. I don't know if y'all can see that. Some will not. So if it's not on there, I've had agents before call me and say, I got the ALTA and none of my commission is on there. This is not an ALTA, this is a CD. You shouldn't have it at all, but if you do end up with it, this is not what you should look at. When you are reviewing documents for your side of the closing and for your brokerage, you need an ALTA, and that is not this. So I thought it important to show the difference and explain why those two documents are different and why you really you shouldn't have this at all. Going on through it, this third page kind of shows where everything comes together. Very similar again to an ALTA with the way that it breaks the numbers down. And then this fourth page is the old truth in lending information. So the old form where they had to sign acknowledging how much interest they're paying over the life of the loan, all that stuff is on these last 2 pages. And so we don't have separate good faith estimates anymore and separate truth in lending. It's all within this document. So that's a closing disclosure. Does anybody have questions about that? All right, I'm going to scroll on up and I'm going to show you a seller CD. Because of TRID's guidelines that only the buyer can see that CD, then we have to do a separate one for the seller. And so this is going to be transactions where there's a loan involved. If there's a loan involved, you're going to have a buyer CD and then you're going to have your seller CD, and they're always going to be two separate documents. So this is a seller CD, and you can see that it looks very similar to pages 2 and 3 of the closing disclosure that I showed, but these are all of just the seller's fees. You have the sales price, any credits for prorations, total closing cost amount, which does include commission, mortgage payoff, and then down at the very bottom is their bottom line. That's what they're taking home. So in a loan transaction, you're going to have your closing disclosure, then you're going to have your seller's closing disclosure. The seller's closing disclosure can only be released to the seller. So each of these documents can only be sent out to their respective parties. And that brings in the need for the ALTA, because otherwise we don't have a document that we can give to you as the agent, or to HOAs who asked for it, or any other party who needs proof that the transaction closed and needs a breakdown of all of those fees. So the very first form that I showed is the ALTA. This is your settlement statement. This is the one that you should have, and this is what you should be reviewing prior to your closing. So the ALTA is a little bit different because the seller side of the transaction is on the left. On the other form, it's on the far right. So that's one area of confusion when you're an agent and you're looking at it. Most of the time, you're going to be wanting, as an agent, to look at the seller side. Sorry, I went too far. So the seller side of your ALTA is on the left, and then that side is divided into two different sections of debits and credits. So on this one, for example, the sales price was $330. That's considered a credit to the seller because that's what you're paying the seller for the property. So that's money to them. Right below that is where your prorations are going to be. When you're looking at an ALTA as an agent, you want to scan over that and just make sure that you see something there, because there should always be tax prorations, unless it is some special circumstance where they have agreed that they're not going to prorate. That happens occasionally. That the buyer just says, I'll pay it when it comes out. That's usually one of those things you're just trying to capture the deal. But in most cases, you should see something there. This one has the HOA assessments prorated because the seller had already paid those items all the way through September. I don't know if y'all can see it, but it shows April 23rd, which was our closing date, to September 1st. That's how far out the seller had paid the HOA. And so they're getting a credit back for that. So essentially the buyer is reimbursing them for those. Prorations are always an area of confusion on the settlement statements and who's paying for what and why. Below that are the county tax prorations. Your seller, and you should be talking to them about this when you're taking a listing, is always going to pay their portion of the taxes. So this time of year, taxes are not due. They should be paid. If they're not paid, they're delinquent at this point. And so you should always have tax prorations from January 1 through whatever your closing date is. So as you're doing net sheets for them, or, you know, if you've got somebody that's really beating you up on fees, then you need to ask them how much were your property taxes, and you can kind of do some rough math based on the time of year to estimate how much they're going to pay, but they're always going to be responsible for that. Otherwise, everything over on the far right side, those are the buyer's fees. If you are a listing agent, you don't need to look at that. I have lots of agents that'll call me and be very upset about fees on that side, and it's because they think that's the seller and it's not. So if you're only listing the property, then you really don't need to be worried about what loan fees are being charged, what their loan amount is, recording fees, all that. That's what all of this is. And you can see on the prorations on this side, it flips. So right here, like for the HOA, for example, that was $188 credit to the seller, it debits that from the buyer. So on both sides of it, you have debits and credits. Below that are all the loan fees. And those numbers come straight off of the closing disclosure. So they're always going to be the same. Your ALTA and the closing disclosure that your client gets at the table should always match. Whatever they're bringing to closing, if you have a buyer, should match on the ALTA as to what they were disclosed on the CD. And if you have a seller, the seller CD that they sign should be the same. If there's a discrepancy on that, you need to get your title company involved immediately because something is wrong. So scrolling on down to the second page, all of the title and settlement charges are put under kind of one area. Most of that is over here to the right because in this particular transaction, this was an investment deal. So the investor did not ask the seller to pay anything on their behalf. So you can see that they were charged the title insurance for the lender and owner, and then my closing fees, doc delivery, notary fees, etc. Those are where all of your fees to the title company should be. If the seller was paying for the title insurance, it would be over here. And so as you're reviewing your ALTA for your client, if your seller is paying fees, then you need to see those on the seller side. As you can see, there's nothing here. I've used this one though, because in this transaction, the commission is 2.5% to each agent, but my listing agent, which was the bottom one, I took the brokerages off, but this is my agent, pays a transaction coordinator out of his commission. And I showed this one because that seems to be a discrepancy that we're seeing a lot, and errors that are coming over on ALTAs in the way that that is disclosed. So you all have your CDAs that you do, and that should show a total amount of commission that your seller has agreed to pay. Anything that is coming out of that will reduce your commission amount. And when you add up those items, it all has to balance back to that number at the top. So if you guys are paying transaction coordinators and you intend to pay it out of your commission, then your commission is going to be reduced like it is right here. And then when you scroll on down, you can see right here a $400 fee to the closing coordinator. If you add those two numbers together, it brings you back to the 2.5% commission that the seller agreed to pay. So I think one of the issues and discrepancies that have been coming over with some ALTAs that Zach and Taylor were concerned about is that they're signing off on a CDA with a total amount of commission, and then the ALTAs are coming over with additional fees. You cannot do that. If your client is paying your closing coordinator, that's fine. Some agents pass those fees on to their clients, but you've got to have a disclosure that says that. And it needs to be shown on your CDA. There's got to be something in the file that shows that the client agreed to pay that. Conversely, if you have a buyer side and you're passing that fee to your buyer, then the fee would be over here on the right, like right here where the homeowner's insurance premium is. You'd have a line item, or this $400 would just move over to the right. And that's fine, but again, you've got to have something that your client agreed to pay it. You cannot charge ancillary fees to your clients if there's not something supporting that in the contract docs. That's a huge, huge problem. Everything has to balance out on the CDA. So for a Zach Taylor closing, when we close one of those out, this is what I emailed to Zach and Taylor both. This executed ALTA would look like this. It would have all the signatures, and I send them your CDA. And so when they go adding these numbers up, commission, like on this one, commission, and then closing coordination, that needs to add to the number that's on your closing disclosure. It cannot be different, and they are checking those. Yes.
So how should it reflect if, let's say it's $8,000 total commission, and then they are paying the transaction fee?
Out of the commission?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to show you. Beth, is it okay if I use your closing we just did?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you may not be able to see this great on Zoom, but I'm going to pull up my software. This is a closing that literally just funded this morning. This is one of Beth's.
Is it the other one you emailed me?
Mm-hmm. It is, but I have to manipulate it. It's
Okay.
not gonna,
Okay.
because she didn't charge anything. So on this particular deal, it was 3%, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Commission was a total Commission was 3%. It was a total of $7,950. Beth is covering the $99 transaction fee to Zach Taylor out of her commission. So the $79.50 is then reduced to $78.51. If, for example, just for easy math, say she was going to pay a $200 transaction fee to a coordinator, then we would reduce that commission even further by $299. And then we would come over to our seller side and we would add another line item. And we would call it transaction fee for $200. And so again, the CDA that I received from her showed a total commission of $79.50. So her commission now is $7,651 plus 200 is $78.51 plus the $99, which goes to the brokerage, gets you back to the total of $79.50. It all adds up. There's nothing there that doesn't. If her commission was still $78.51, then that means that the seller would be paying that transaction fee, and they did not agree to pay that. So again, everything needs to, those CDAs are very clear. I love that they do that. Most brokerages don't. It's easy as a title company to look at what the total should be, and then all of the deductions have to match that. If they don't match that, then we have a problem. If your title companies are not emailing you your ALTAs prior to closing, then you need to be speaking to them, and that needs to be happening. It's very hard to correct an issue at the closing table. By the time we get to the closing table, people have already wired their money. Even if it's something that's their responsibility to pay, they don't like to be asked for it once they've already sent a wire. Then it feels like you're coming back and asking for something else. So reviewing the ALTA that your title company sends you is your opportunity to make sure that you're getting paid. This is your paycheck. So this is the part that you really need to pay attention to. It's your opportunity to make sure that you are getting paid and that everything that was agreed in the transaction is getting paid. I would suggest if you have a listing and a seller side, if you're not doing net sheets, you should, that would show everything that your client agrees to pay. That way, when you get that ALTA, you can go through there and you can check off those items, because there could be a home warranty, there could be a termite treatment, and you can go down there quickly and verify your commission. You can make sure everything they agreed to pay is on there. And then you can also look for items that they didn't agree to pay. For example, a termite treatment, maybe they weren't going to pay that and that needs to be moved back to the buyer. But if you're not reviewing those items ahead of time, then it's very, very difficult to fix it after the fact. And as title companies, we can only collect the information that you're giving us. So you don't tell us about it, we don't know about it, and we're not going to absorb the cost of something that we just didn't know about. Now, if we didn't send you the ALTA, you never saw it, and we had an error, where we, Advance Title, would make that right. Some title companies, though, will not. That's sort of a company to company basis, and some of them look at it that once the transaction's closed, it's closed, and it makes it very difficult then to go back and try to collect money from other parties. It's very difficult to go back and correct the commission issues. And it's kind of embarrassing to have to go back and tell people you have to refund them because you charged something that you weren't allowed to charge. We definitely don't want to be doing that, and we don't want Zach and Taylor to be making those calls. Yes.
What about if we're an agent, we're working a deal, we're under contract, we've gotten through inspections, appraisals, we're getting closer to closing? At what time frame should we be like, hey, we should probably look for the ALTA or start inquiring? Because we don't want to, like, if it's day before closing, we're like, hey, numbers are wrong.
Right.
Like, how much time do you guys need?
Right.
When should we start seeing that?
So the closing disclosure should go out 3 days in advance. At that point, if you have the buyer side, you should be able to review everything. But a lot of lenders send those out and they just kind of use an estimate, and they don't issue a final until, you know, maybe a few minutes before the client shows up. It just depends. You absolutely 24 hours prior, you should have it. 48 would be even better. When you get to the point that you're scheduling a closing and, you know, everybody feels like this is happening and the lender has given the client an amount to wire, you should have it. Now, split closings are something that we do frequently. So on my side, for example, if I represent a buyer, then I don't really have any control over the seller's portion. All of those fees have to come from the seller's title company, because the seller ultimately is decided, well, they've agreed to pay a certain percentage of commission. We have to get that information from their title agency as to how much was paid. They have to send us copies of mortgages, any liens to pay off, all those kind of things. So it really depends how quickly you get the information, both from the lender and from the cooperating title agency. But ideally, 48 hours minimum of 24 before would be great.
So they'll usually send these out 24 to 48 hours.
You should.
Okay.
Yeah, you should. Yeah. And you know, if you're waiting on something, you can, as title companies, you can go ahead and send it out and say, I'm waiting on X, Y, or Z, but go ahead and review your commission, or, you know, that's just kind of a communication thing. Some title companies do not like to do it until everything is final, because they don't want to do extra work, and I understand that. But sometimes it's more pertinent to get it out to the agents. That way they can go ahead and, you know, and sometimes you do your final walkthrough and you realize we've got an issue to solve, and we're going to be throwing a warranty on there, or we're going to be adding a repair or something like that. So you want to have it in enough time to be able to, you know, add those items on there as well.
Anybody have any questions on Zoom?
Yes.
I got one. Can you elaborate on the owner's title insurance that's optional?
I can. Okay, so
Get it.
yeah, get it. Okay, owner's title insurance in general, that covers the owner up to their sales price against any title issues. It also covers them if we've made a mistake. Lots of people will say, well, I don't want the owner's title insurance because you ran a title search on it. Well, we have, and I'm a title searcher, and I have an in-house title searcher, and we make mistakes. We miss things. When you're running a title search, you're looking at 30 years worth of records on the property. And when you've got a borrower named James Smith, there could be thousands of records, and sometimes you miss things. So the title insurance in general covers you on those items, because things like mortgages, judgments, bankruptcy issues, divorce issues, estate issues, those all follow property in the state of Tennessee. So if there is a lien that's already out there, even if it's recorded in another county, it's attached to your property, and it's attached to that property, and selling that property does not absolve that lien. So on this particular deal, you can see the lender's title insurance was $1,097. It was a $201,000 loan amount. If there's a loan involved, the lender is always going to insure their money, always. That is a policy for them up to their loan amount, only the loan amount, because that's all they have invested in the transaction, that covers them if an issue like that were to pop up. It's basically an insurance policy that ensures them that this title is clear, and that if the title company made a mistake, or if the seller went out the day of closing and took out a mortgage, that those things have happened, that their money is, that they're going to get it back, that they can file it on our title insurance. So the owner's portion is optional coverage, and the price on that is based on the difference between the loan amount and the sales price. This one that you're looking at was an investment deal. So the sales price was $330,000. So it's quite a difference between the sales price and the loan amount. And that's why the cost on that was $422. So essentially that's covering, in this transaction, the buyer really only has $131,000 of their own money in it. The rest of it is the lender's money, and they don't really care about protecting their money. But he invested, you know, $130,000 plus of his own money, and so that portion covers them. The lender's policy, it used to be that the owner's policy was more expensive and the lender policy was cheaper. That was another change that came with TRID. The loan policies now are the expensive policy, and the owner can add back on for cheap. And I'll show you, I'll give you an example on, I'm going to use Beth's deal again. So Beth just closed a deal. The sales price on that was $265, and he borrowed $250. And so on that one, The lender's title insurance was $765. The owner's portion was only $70. So even though it says that it's optional, it does not make sense to waive save $70 to lose your owner's coverage. Your owner's policy is good for the life of you owning the property. So as you pay it down and gain more equity, your owner's policy covers all that, because your owner's policy is covering you for your sales price. So 10 years from now, when you don't owe as much, you're still going to have coverage for, in this case, $265. Those fees are set by the state Department of Insurance. That's not something that we as title companies can mess with. Those are the same across the board. The different underwriters may vary just a little bit, but it shouldn't be very much. So as you're talking to your clients about where they're going to close, or you're getting quotes for title insurance, those two things, the lender and owner's insurance, really should not vary from title company to title company. The thing that would vary between title company to title company are your closing fees, your notary fees, your doc delivery fees, your deed prep, attorney. We don't add a whole ton of those fees, but some of them do. Some title companies like to charge cheap fees, but charge 10 of them. And so the price ends up being the same. We don't do that. We like to just charge one big fee that kind of covers everything. I feel like it's less confusing that way. But as far as the title insurance goes, that's what the disclosure is on it. In this particular, on Beth's deal, if there was no loan involved, if this was a cash deal, then you wouldn't have that lender's insurance. And so the total premium would be that $765 plus 70. So about $840. But it would be $840 to insure $265,000 of your own money. So I think it's worth it, because I see the title issues later on. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Does the seller of the property having a owner's policy help with the cost of the future buyer?
It would, yeah. If you're negotiating a transaction and you are asking the seller to pay for the title insurance, then if they already have a policy, and they do have to produce it, it has to be the full policy. They're usually 7 or 8 pages long. But assuming they can produce that so that we can put it in our file, then the new policy to the buyer is discounted. So either way, it would save either party money. Most of the time, the seller doesn't care to dig it out unless it's saving them money because they're paying for the title. But it does not hurt to ask. You can always ask a listing agent if their seller has a title policy that they can produce that would definitely help offset those fees. And there's no time limit on that. Lots of old school agents that have been in the business forever will tell you, they try to tell me the percentage discount, and and we don't do that anymore. It used to be around 30% it would discount, but all the underwriters with TRID changed it. Now it is based off of the original face amount of the policy, when it was issued. So if it's a policy from 20 years ago and the property was only worth $75,000 then, and now the property is selling for $500,000, then you're not going to get as big of a discount on the title insurance as you would if you had a policy for, you know, a larger amount, because it is based on what the property is worth. But yeah. Sure.
What about as we are writing offers, we get something bound and you are a go-to title company, what should we send to you to make your life easier and kind of get the ball rolling?
So the first thing we need is an executed contract. Lots of agents like to be helpful and send us a contract that's not bound, but I can't do anything with that. I need a legally bound contract. Until it is bound and all the terms are agreed upon, I'm not even going to start a file on it. And so we need a good, fully executed contract. We need contact information for your clients, because otherwise we're going to be asking you for it. It would be helpful to let your seller know who's closing for them, give them my name or tell them Advance Title, because then when we call them, they're expecting to hear from us, because a lot of times they don't know who we are. And they don't want to talk to us until they talk to you. And it just kind of adds an extra step. So if you go ahead and say, hey, Advance Title of Murfreesboro is going to be reaching out. These are the items they're going to ask for. We have to have socials. We a lot of times have to get a written authorization from them, which we can send with an e-signature to get mortgage payoffs, but a lot of times they don't like to give us that information. So a bound contract, good contact information, and then your commission agreement. A lot of times agents will send us the compensation agreement, and that doesn't help me because it helps a little bit because I can see what you're supposed to get, but that compensation agreement does not say what the full commission is. So if I'm prepping a buyer side and I need to know the commission, then that doesn't help. I might see that Cameron's getting 3%, but I don't know what it is on the other side. So having the MLS listing is also really, really helpful because that usually has the commission. And then if there's some discrepancy, that's kind of what we use to hold them to, is what they advertised. It's also helpful to see what they advertise. We're getting a lot right now of acreage and properties that haven't been platted yet or aren't, new construction. Lots of people have land that with the prices they've decided to sell it. So having that kind of helps us to get our title search going and figure out what we're actually talking about, what we're dealing with. Yeah. And I'll email Zach my e-card and he can send it out to all of y'all. That way you'll have our information if anybody wants to use us for closings. I will say we will send a notary anywhere for your clients. We don't charge for that. So if you say, I primarily sell property in Nashville, that's fine. We have a closer who lives in Nashville, who does most of my Nashville closings, and we do not pass that fee along to your client. Most title companies are charging notary fees and travel fees, and they're making money on those, and we just don't do that. So we don't want the proximity of the property to our office to prevent us from otherwise doing the deal for you guys. So that's just a little plug that doesn't have anything to do with Altas, but.
I've got a title policy question.
Sure.
This is Dana. I need to know, would it cover something like a mechanic's lien? Are there any other, if that's an exclusion, are there any other exclusions?
So it depends. I would have to look at the policy. A title policy, once it's issued, it should not have any exclusion for mechanics liens coverage. However, if there was some type of issue on the property, if a notice of completion didn't get filed in time, then they may put that in as an exclusion, but typically it is not. When your buyer purchases a property, they should have it free of any type of prior liens, including mechanics liens. That is why a notice of completion is filed. Those have to be filed 10 days prior to closing, and that shuts the window for any mechanics liens, and that is so that we can issue a clear title policy to your buyer. So a mechanics lien should never, ever prevent your buyer from then selling or refinancing. It shouldn't be following them on the property at all. Does that answer your question?
Yes, somewhat. I had a seller or a buyer actually have someone try to collect money once she took possession of the property. It was kind of bizarre.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. That's why a 10-day notice of completion goes down. That notice goes out in the registrar's office, and it basically is a notice to anybody who feels like they may be owed anything on the property that you've got 10 days to collect it, or we're selling it to a new buyer, and your window to attach that lien to the property is then closed. They can still pursue the seller. So say it was a builder that had a lien and never paid it or something like that, they can pursue them personally, but they can't attach it to the real property. Now, if the lien was already recorded prior to your closing, so for example, if the seller had a UCC or an HVAC system that they didn't pay for, and the title company missed that lien and did not collect it at closing, and so it's still there, that is still a valid lien on the property, and that is what your title insurance would cover. So that would be something that you would go back to that title company, because that's a mistake on their part, and that's what title insurance covers. So it could have been that type of situation. I would have to look at it, you know, to know.
Any other questions from Zoom? They're speechless.
Speechless. Well, I would say, you know, finally, just if you get an ALTA, it's hard to show. I can show one example, but there are so many different types of things that could come up in your transaction and who's paying for what and how. And sometimes you kind of have to get creative to get that information on there. If you're not sure if it's correct, don't be afraid to ask. I have my agents call me all the time and say, I don't understand this, because you are really the contact with your client. You're going to be the first one probably explaining it to them before they see me at the closing table. Most people they don't like those surprises at the closing table. They like to know about it in advance. It will make your closing go much more smoothly. And it will leave them with a good experience at the table, which is what you want, because good experiences at the closing table results in referrals down the road. When they get to the table and there's a problem, even if it's something that we can correct, it just gives them a feeling that you weren't prepared and that we weren't prepared. And they feel like they've paid you money to do a service for them. And then they're not sure. It just sort of brings into their mind questions about the whole thing. All of a sudden, they're unsure about everything if there's one little issue that has to be corrected. So we really, really try to avoid. It's better to catch an issue and correct it at the closing table than not at all, or to not say anything. But don't be embarrassed. For example, I had one the other day that the contract said that my agent was paying for a home warranty for the client. And so the way that you have to do that is, again, to reduce the commission. So her commission was reduced by $500, and then there was the charge for the warranty. And I sent her the ALTA. She responded to me via email and said, this looks great. And then we got to closing. And anytime an agent pays for something like that, I try to promote it at the table, because I want your client to know that you did that for them. And it's better for me to tell them that you did that for them than for you to tell them that you did that for them. And so I was telling this lady that your agent was so gracious and paid for this warranty for you. And the agent called me 2 days later and said, I didn't mean to do that. And, and I want my $500 back. And that creates an awkward situation, because I sent it to her and she responded to me and said, this looks great. And then at the closing table didn't say anything, and then waited 48 hours later when maybe we could have done something different. So I say that to say, please don't be embarrassed to speak up if you're not sure about something, and ask your title company, or ask Zach or Taylor to take a look at it. Sometimes you look at a lot of these and there's a lot of numbers, or transactions get crazy, and you just need a second set of eyes on it. But things can always be fixed ahead of time. But once Taylor and Zach are getting it, then it's really, really hard to go back. At that point, you're asking for somebody else to come out of their pocket on something. And a lot of times they're just not going to do it. You kind of end up stuck. So, don't ever be afraid to ask those questions. And most importantly, just please review your ALTAs. I always ask my agents to respond to me that they've seen it. And if I don't hear from you that you looked at it, I'm going to text you. I'm trying to get you to go on record for me that you looked at it, because when you don't, that's when these problems arise, and it just makes us all look bad at the closing table, and that's not what we want. So take 10 minutes. Don't do it in your car when you're flying down the road. Take a minute where you can think and look at it, ask any questions, and then we can move on, and everybody will be happy. Your clients, your closing agents, and you. Yes.
Along that same line, if part of the transaction says it's going to be paid at closing, if you're paying it, it's on there.
It's on there.
And agents
That's
need
right.
to check if it's a window, if it's paying off a credit card that
Yes.
somebody has to pay. If it says
Mhm.
paid at closing, that need to be making sure it's there, because also it helps to get the numbers right, because back end surprises to clients
Right.
with money.
They don't like it.
No,
Right.
they don't like it.
Right. Even when a seller walks away with $150,000 more than they thought they would. That's happening right now. And you come back and ask them for $50 to pay the termite letter they were supposed to, they're not gonna do it. They're gonna throw a fit and they're gonna, you know, it's one of those things that even though they should have paid it and it is their responsibility, when you ask them after the fact, everybody has this attitude of like, it's over. Too bad, you should have collected it. And then it puts us in the situation of, is the title company gonna pay it? Is the agent gonna pay it? And at the end of the day, you know, we don't want to be paying for, and you don't want to be paying for things that you didn't agree to. That is an excellent point and was another thing that I was going to bring up and forgot, but that's what this ALTA is for. This is your legal document that shows all of the disbursements in the entire transaction. Money in and money out should be reflected on this ALTA. Everything should be there. Earnest money should be there. Occasionally you will have a lender tell you, I can't show that on my CD. And it's, you know, that the seller is gonna give the buyer $1,500 for paint or a window that was broken or whatever. The lenders don't want to see it because that has to be re-underwritten. Anything that even remotely looks like a repair kind of throws red flags for them. So if they tell you, I don't want it on there, it's not going to be on this ALTA, but you still need to be doing an amendment. And your amendment then needs to state that outside of closing, seller will reimburse buyer via a personal check, via a cashier's check, however they're going to pay it at closing for XYZ items. And you need to pass that along to your title company so that we can at least collect it. But for the most part, 95% of the time, everything needs to be on here. We don't like to have a bunch of outside of closing things. Also, lenders are not going to take personal property purchases. I've got 3 or 4 right now that apparently the buyers come in and want everything. They want the furniture and the refrigerators and the, you know, lenders are not going to allow that. So I would suggest not putting that in your contracts. You can do a separate bill of sale for those items, but that's between them. And just be mindful too, that when you write those outside of closing items, if it is outside of closing, that means it is not part of what's being disclosed as our legally bound contract. And neither myself nor my attorney can get involved in collecting those items if it doesn't work out for you. So I don't love outside of closing amendments for that very reason, because you're saying, I don't want it disclosed here for the lender, you know, and everybody to know about, and everybody to sign off and agree on. And so I don't have any leverage then. If they don't follow through, you just have to understand that's between you and your client. And as always, your client's gonna be looking at you to make it up. If the seller defaults on them, you know, they're gonna be looking for you. So as much as you can, try to structure those agreements where everything goes in that ALTA, so that everything is disclosed and we can always go back to them. We can go back. If Zach and Taylor needed to get their other brokerage involved, they can go back to them. But if we don't have it disclosed somewhere that everybody signed off on and agreed to it, then they can't do that. And that doesn't help your client.
Perfect.
Anything else? Questions about the ALTA in general?
Very good.
All right.
Thank you so much, Kayla, for
Sure.
your time.
Yeah, hopefully it was helpful.
So I'll post Kayla's information down below. That way, in case you guys want to give her a shot, use her as a title company, or just ask her any questions in general. She'll be there to help you out. And she's also on the 3rd floor of our building. So go ahead and
Yes,
say hi.
we're right upstairs, so we'll walk your commission checks right down to you. But I am happy, you know, if you're not sure about something and you just want somebody to take a look at it, I'm happy to take a look at it. I can't wade into it, and you know, some title companies do things differently, so I can't demand that they necessarily do something different, but I can at least tell you if this is gonna fly when Zach and Taylor get it, that kind of thing. So I'm happy to look at things if you're not sure and you just don't have a good feeling about it. I'm happy to do that anytime too.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for jumping on.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I'll post this on YouTube as well. Thank you guys.